I stood at the viewport of the assault ship and watched the blue and green world grow larger. New Meridian, a human colony on the edge of space that nobody in the galaxy cared about. The perfect target for the Dominion to test human defenses. He was young for a warrior. His scales had not yet darkened to the deep green of a veteran. This was his first real battle, and he wanted to prove himself worthy of his clan name. The officers said this mission would be easy. Humans were soft creatures. They cried when they felt pain. They hugged each other when they felt sad. They were ruled by emotions instead of logic. How could such beings ever stand against the cold efficiency of the fleet commander, a veteran named, had briefed them that morning. He showed them images of humans. They had no claws, no armored scales, no venom glands. Their teeth were flat and useless for combat. They could not see in the dark. They could not hear beyond a narrow range. By every measure, they were prey animals who had somehow built starships. I had laughed along with his squad mates. This would not be a battle. This would be a harvest. The assault ships dropped through the atmosphere like burning stones. I gripped his pulse rifle and felt his heart's beat faster. Around him, 50 warriors checked their weapons and armor. They were ready for war. But there was no war waiting for them. New Meridian was a farming colony. The humans had built their settlement in a wide valley surrounded by fields of golden grain. There were no military bases, no defense platforms, just simple homes and barns and a school where human children learned to read and count. The ground forces landed in the center of the settlement. I expected resistance. He expected humans to fight back with whatever weapons they had. Instead, he watched them run. They screamed and fled in all directions. Parents grabbed their children and sprinted for the forest. Old humans hobbled as fast as their weak legs could carry them. I felt disgust rise in his throat. These creatures had no honor. They did not even try to defend their homes. They simply ran like frightened animals. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 2 hours. Soldiers rounded up the humans who could not escape. They gathered them in the central square near a fountain that had a statue of a human woman holding a child. I thought it was a strange thing to build a statue of. He counted maybe 300 humans kneeling in the square. They were crying. Some of them held each other. A few of the males had tried to fight during the roundup, and they lay dead in the streets. Their sacrifice had meant nothing. Commander walked among the prisoners like a farmer inspecting livestock. He stopped in front of a human male with gray hair and asked where the military forces were hidden. The human said there were no military forces. New Meridian was just a farming colony. They had no weapons. They had no soldiers. They were peaceful people who only wanted to grow food and raise families. Did not believe him. He ordered his soldiers to search every building. They found nothing but farming tools and cooking supplies and toys for children. The humans were telling the truth. This world had no defenses at all. This should have been good news. Instead, it made angry. He had brought a fleet to conquer a world that could not fight back. There would be no glory in this victory. No songs sung about the battle. His superiors would mock him for wasting resources on such a pathetic target. Needed to send a message. He needed other human worlds to fear He needed to make this conquest mean something. He ordered his soldiers to separate the children from the adults. I watched as warriors pulled crying children away from their parents. The humans screamed and begged. Some of them tried to hold on to their young ones and were beaten until they let go. A group of about 40 human children was pushed to one side of the square. They ranged from very small to almost adult. All of them were terrified. Announced that these children would be executed as a warning to all human worlds. Any colony that resisted expansion would suffer the same fate. He wanted humans across the galaxy to know that the Dominion showed no mercy. The human prisoners went silent. I had expected more screaming, more crying. Instead, something changed in the air. He could not explain what it was. The humans were still kneeling. They were still unarmed and helpless, but something was different. A woman stood up from the crowd of prisoners. She was not young and she was not old. She had brown hair and kind eyes, and she wore simple clothes covered in dirt from the fields. Her name was, and she was a teacher at the colony school. She had taught most of the children now lined up for execution. She walked toward Commander with her hands raised to show she meant no harm. She begged him to spare the children. She said they were innocent. She said they had done nothing wrong. She offered her own life in exchange. She offered the lives of all the adults. Just please, she begged, do not hurt the children. Looked at her with cold eyes. Then he drew his blade and struck her down. Fell to the ground and did not move again. I watched the humans react to her death. Some of them screamed, some of them cried, but one of them did something different. A human male near the front of the prisoners slowly raised his head. He was not remarkable in any way. He had brown hair and a simple face and the rough hands of someone who worked the soil. His name was Daniel Porter, and he had been a farmer on New Meridian for 15 years. He had a wife who died of sickness 3 years ago. He had no children of his own. He had lived a quiet and peaceful life. Daniel Porter looked at its body. Then he looked at the children lined up for execution. Then he looked at Commander. I saw something change in the human's eyes. He had seen fear in human eyes all day. He had seen despair and grief and confusion. But this was something new. This was something he had never seen before. He did not know what it was. He would learn soon enough. The sun began to set over New Meridian. The soldiers prepared for the executions. The human prisoners knelt in silence. And Daniel Porter began to plan. The executions were scheduled for dawn. Commander wanted the rising sun to illuminate the bodies so that any human ship passing through the system would see what happened to those who lived on the edge of space. He ordered his soldiers to rest in shifts and keep watch over the prisoners through the night. I was assigned to guard duty. He stood at the edge of the square with his rifle ready and watched the humans huddle together in the cold darkness. They should have been broken. They had seen their defenders die. They had watched their teacher murdered. They knew their children would be killed in a few hours. By every logical measure, they should have given up all hope. But they were not broken. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they whispered to each other, the way they looked at their guards with eyes that no longer held fear. Something had changed since died. The tears had stopped. The screaming had stopped. In their place was a quiet that felt dangerous. I had hunted predators on his home world. He knew the silence that came before an attack. He reported his concerns to his squad leader. The older warrior laughed at him. These were farmers and teachers, he said. What could they possibly do against armed soldiers? Go back to your post and stop jumping at shadows. A returned to his position, but he could not shake his unease. He watched Daniel Porter moving among the prisoners. The human farmer was speaking softly to the others. He touched their shoulders. He looked into their eyes. Whatever he was saying, it was spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Near midnight, a human woman asked permission to use the waste facilities. The guards let her go with an escort. She was an older female with gray hair and a bent back. She was no threat. She did not return. The escort did not return either. An hour later, a supply building on the edge of the settlement caught fire. The flames rose high into the night sky, sent a squad to investigate. They found nothing but ashes and shadows. 2 soldiers went missing during the search. They began to realize something was wrong. I was part of the team sent to search the agricultural district. The massive barns and storage buildings created a maze of dark corridors and hidden spaces. His squad moved carefully with weapons raised. They were trained warriors. They were not afraid of unarmed farmers. The first attack came without warning. A human woman burst from the shadows with a harvesting blade in her hands. She was small and thin with dark hair, and eyes that burned with something I had no word for. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had worked in the grain fields for 10 years. She had never held a weapon before today. She killed 2 soldiers before anyone could react. I watched her move. She was not trained. She was not skilled. She simply did not care if she lived or died. She threw herself at his squad mates with no thought for her own safety. The blade cut through scales and armor with the strength of pure desperation. A pulse rifle shot finally brought her down. Even then, she did not stop. She crawled toward the nearest soldier with the blade still in her grip. Her last act was to sink her teeth into his arm and bite down until her life ended. I stood frozen. He had never seen anything like this. Maria Santos should have surrendered. She should have begged for mercy. She should have tried to escape. Instead, she had traded her life for 2 warriors without a moment of hesitation. The squad leader ordered a retreat. They dragged their wounded back to the central square and reported what had happened. Listened with growing anger. He demanded to know how a single unarmed human female had killed 2 of his soldiers. Nobody had an answer. The attacks continued through the night. Humans appeared from nowhere and struck fast before vanishing into the darkness. They used farming tools and kitchen knives and broken pieces of machinery. They fought with a ferocity that made no sense. They were better armed and better trained. They should have crushed this resistance in minutes. But the humans did not fight like soldiers. They did not try to win. They did not try to survive. They fought only to kill as many as possible before they died, and that made them terrifying. I saw a human male attack a fortified position with nothing but a metal pipe. He was shot 6 times before he fell. He killed 1 soldier and wounded 2 others. His body lay in the street with a smile frozen on his face. He saw a human female throw herself onto a plasma grenade to shield 2 children who had escaped during the chaos. The explosion tore her apart. The children survived. He saw humans who should have been dead keep fighting. A man with 3 wounds in his chest strangled a soldier with his bare hands before his body finally gave out. A woman with a shattered leg crawled across the ground to deliver a single knife strike to an officer's throat. By dawn, they had lost 30 soldiers. The humans had lost more than twice that number. But the humans had started with nothing, and they had started with everything. The mathematics of this battle did not make sense. Commander stood in the center of the square and watched the sun rise over a settlement that had become a war zone. The easy conquest had become a nightmare. His soldiers were afraid. They jumped at every shadow. They fired at every sound. Daniel Porter appeared at the edge of the square. He was wounded. Blood ran down his arm and his face was covered in dirt and ash. Behind him stood maybe 50 humans armed with whatever they had managed to take from fallen soldiers. They were farmers and teachers and shopkeepers. They were nobody. But they were not running anymore. Daniel looked at the children still guarded by soldiers. He looked at his people standing behind him. Then he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Protect the children," he said. "Nothing else matters, protect the children." The humans charged. I had been trained for war since he could walk. He had studied tactics and strategy. He had learned how different species fought and how to defeat them. He thought he understood combat. He was wrong. The humans came at the positions like a wave crashing against rocks. They had no formation. They had no plan beyond moving forward. They simply ran at the enemy with weapons raised and screaming something that sounded like rage and grief and love all mixed together. They opened fire. Pulse rifles cut down the first line of attackers. Bodies fell and did not rise. The charge should have broken. Any sane creature would have retreated after seeing their companions die so quickly. The humans did not retreat. They ran faster. Fired his weapon until the power cell was empty. He watched humans fall and other humans take their place. He watched wounded humans crawl forward when they could no longer run. He watched dying humans use their last breath to throw their weapons to those still standing. A human male reached the line. He was shot twice in the chest, but he did not stop. He grabbed a soldier's rifle and used it as a club. He killed one warrior and broke another's arm before a blade finally ended him. His body fell across the soldier he had killed, their blood mixing together on the ground. The line began to crack. I had never seen his people retreat. Warriors did not run from battle. It was against everything they believed. But they were running now. They stumbled backward with fear in their eyes. Some of them dropped their weapons. Some of them simply turned and fled. Commander screamed orders that nobody followed. He shot one of his own soldiers for cowardice. It did not matter. The fear had spread too deep. Daniel Porter fought at the front of the human charge. He had taken a pulse rifle from a fallen and he used it with brutal efficiency. He was not a trained soldier. His aim was not perfect. But he did not miss when it mattered. Every shot he fired was meant to protect the children behind him. I found himself face to face with the human farmer. They stood 3 meters apart in the chaos of battle. Daniel's eyes met his, and I finally understood what he had seen the night before. It was not rage. Rage burned hot and fast and then faded. This was something else. This was cold and eternal and absolutely certain. This was a human who had decided that some things were more important than his own life. This was a human who would not stop until those things were safe. I raised his weapon. Daniel raised his. A soldier tackled Daniel from the side before either could fire. They went down in a tangle of limbs and scales. I watched the human fight with his bare hands against a trained warrior twice his size. Daniel gouged at eyes and bit at throats and slammed his forehead into the soldier's face again and again. The soldier died with Daniel's thumbs in his eye sockets. Daniel stood up slowly. His face was covered in blood that was not his own. He looked at it again with those terrible eyes. Then he turned and ran toward the children. I did not follow. He stood frozen in the middle of the battle and watched the humans push forward. They were winning. These farmers and teachers were defeating trained warriors through nothing but the absolute refusal to give up. A human woman used her body as a shield when a soldier aimed at a child who had broken free from the guards. The pulse blast burned through her back and she fell without a sound. The child escaped into the crowd. A human man with both legs broken dragged himself across the ground to grab a soldier's ankle. He held on long enough for another human to strike the killing blow. Then he smiled and closed his eyes. An old human male who could barely stand threw himself at an officer and knocked him into a wall. The officer killed him easily, but those few seconds of delay allowed 3 children to reach safety. I watched all of this with growing horror. He had been taught that emotions were weakness. He had been taught that creatures who felt deeply could not fight effectively. He had been taught that they were superior because they did not let feelings cloud their judgment. He had been taught wrong. These humans were not weak because they loved their children. They were strong because of it. Their love gave them something they did not have. It gave them a reason to fight beyond survival. It gave them a purpose beyond victory. The battle lasted 2 more hours. When it ended, they held only the central square. The rest of the settlement belonged to the humans. 43 soldiers were dead. More than 100 humans had fallen, but the children were safe. Daniel Porter stood among the survivors and watched them with steady eyes. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. He should have been dead 3 times over, but he was still standing. Commander ordered his remaining soldiers to form a defensive position. He called for reinforcements from the fleet. He promised that he would burn this world to ashes for what the humans had done. Then the sky lit up with fire. I looked up and saw ships falling from orbit. They burned like meteors as they plunged toward the ground. The fleet was dying. A human ship had arrived. The constellation had received the distress signal sent hours ago. It had come to rescue its people. And it had come with fury. The constellation was a human warship assigned to patrol the outer colonies. It was not the largest ship in the Earth fleet. It was not the most powerful, but it was close enough to receive the distress signal from New Meridian. and its captain had heard every word of what the plan to do. Captain Lisa Monroe had served in the Earth Navy for 22 years. She had fought pirates and smugglers and hostile alien species. She had seen the best and worst of humanity across 100 worlds. She was known for her calm voice and steady hands. Her crew trusted her with their lives. When she heard that aliens were going to execute human children, her calm voice did not change. Her steady hands did not shake. She simply turned to her weapons officer and gave an order. Destroy them all. The fleet had 7 ships. They were confident in their position. They had orbital superiority. They controlled the planet below. They did not expect a single human vessel to attack. The constellation came out of faster-than-light travel with all weapons firing. The first ship died before its crew knew they were under attack. The second ship managed to raise shields. It did not matter. Human weapons tore through the shields like paper. A watched from the ground as his people's ships burned. The constellation moved through the fleet like a predator among prey. It was faster than ships. Its weapons were more accurate, but it was something else that made the difference. The human ship fought with anger. Vessels tried to surrender. They broadcast messages begging for mercy. They offered to leave the system and never return. The constellation ignored every transmission. It destroyed ship after ship until nothing remained but debris and silence. Captain Monroe did not take prisoners in orbit. Her crew did not object. Landing craft dropped from the constellation while the last ship was still dying. 200 human Marines hit the ground with weapons hot. They wore heavy armor and carried rifles that could punch through walls. They were professional soldiers trained for exactly this kind of operation. But they were also humans, and they had heard what happened to the colonists. Saw the Marines enter the settlement. He expected them to attack immediately. Instead, they stopped when they saw the bodies in the streets. Human bodies, men and women who had died fighting with farming tools against pulse rifles. A Marine sergeant knelt beside the body of Maria Santos. She had been left where she fell in the agricultural district. The sergeant closed her eyes gently and whispered something I could not hear. Then he stood and rejoined his squad. The Marines did not speak as they advanced. They did not joke or boast like warriors. They moved in perfect silence with faces as cold as stone. Captain Monroe landed with the second wave. She walked through the settlement and looked at every human body they passed. She asked the survivors for names. She wrote them down in a small book she carried in her jacket. She found's body in the central square. The teacher still lay where Commander had struck her down. Monroe knelt beside her and brushed the hair from her face. She stayed there for a long moment. When she stood, I saw her eyes. They were the same as Daniel Porter's, cold and certain and absolutely committed. She had made a decision about what would happen next. The assault on the defensive position lasted 12 minutes. Human Marines attacked from 3 directions at once. They used grenades and heavy weapons and their own bodies when necessary. A Marine threw himself on a blade to give his squad made a clear shot. Another Marine lost an arm and kept fighting with her sidearm until she passed out from blood loss. Commander tried to rally his soldiers. He promised them reinforcements that were not coming. He threatened them with execution for cowardice. Nobody listened. They were broken. They had seen too much. They had lost too many. When the position fell, was still alive. He was dragged before Captain Monroe with his hands bound and his scales covered in the blood of his soldiers. He demanded to be treated as a prisoner of war. He cited galactic conventions. He threatened retaliation from the Dominion. Monroe looked at him without expression. She asked him one question. "Did you order the execution of children?" Lifted his head with pride. He said yes. He said it was necessary to send a message. He said humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy. Monroe nodded slowly. Then she turned and walked away. I expected her to order his execution. She did not. She simply left him kneeling in the square surrounded by Marines who looked at him like he was something they had found stuck to their boots. The surviving colonists gathered in the square as the sun set. Daniel Porter stood among them with a bandage around his chest and his arm in a sling. He had finally accepted medical treatment after the last child was accounted for. 37 children had survived. 112 adults had died protecting them. The math was cruel, but the colonists did not regret it. Monroe approached Daniel and saluted him. She said she had never seen anything like what the colonists had done. She said Earth would remember New Meridian forever. Daniel shook his head. He said they had done what any human would do, nothing more, nothing less. A was captured during the assault. He was wounded but alive. A Marine found him hiding in a storage building and brought him out at gunpoint. He expected to die. He had participated in the invasion. He had watched fall. He had done nothing to stop it. By human logic, he deserved death. Instead, a human medic examined his wounds and began to treat them. I asked why. The medic shrugged and said it was his job to help the wounded, even enemy wounded. He said that was what made humans different from monsters. I did not understand. He would learn. 3 days after the battle, I was brought before Captain Monroe for questioning. He walked through the human settlement with guards on either side and saw what the colonists were doing. They were burying their dead. Each grave was dug by hand. Each body was wrapped in clean cloth. Each name was spoken aloud before the dirt was placed. Humans came from across the settlement to stand beside graves of people they barely knew. They wept openly without shame. I had never seen anything like it. Did not mourn their dead. Bodies were recycled for nutrients. Names were forgotten within days. The dead served no purpose, and so they were not honored. But humans honored their dead. They remembered them. They told stories about them. They made their sacrifices mean something. Monroe was waiting in what had been the colony administration building. She sat behind a simple desk with the small book of names open in front of her. She looked tired. Dark circles hung under her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She asked what he had seen during the invasion. He told her everything. He described the landing and the roundup and the decision to execute children. He described Maria Santos and her harvesting blade. He described Daniel Porter and the charge across the square. Monroe listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked him a question. Why did you not try to stop it? I had no answer. He had followed orders. He had done what his commanders told him to do. That was how they operated. Individual soldiers did not question their superiors. Monroe nodded slowly. She said that was the difference between their species. Humans questioned orders. Humans refused to follow commands that violated their conscience. Humans would disobey their leaders to protect innocent lives. I asked her why he was still alive. He had participated in the invasion. He had watched children lined up for execution. Why had the humans not killed him? Monroe leaned back in her chair and thought about the question for a long moment. Then she answered. She said killing prisoners was what they did. It was not what humans did. She said mercy was not weakness. It was a choice. The hardest choice a person could make after suffering what the colonists had suffered. But she warned him not to mistake mercy for forgiveness. The humans would never forget what happened on New Meridian. They would never forgive the who gave the orders. Commander would face justice for his crimes. The Dominion would answer for what it had done. Mercy was for soldiers who followed orders. It was not for those who gave them. I asked what would happen to him now. Monroe said he would be released and sent back to his people with a message. She wanted them to understand something important about humanity. Humans wanted peace. They truly did. They would negotiate and compromise and sacrifice their own interests to avoid war. They would extend hands of friendship to species who had wronged them. They would forgive almost anything. Almost. There was a line that must never be crossed. Threatening human children was that line. When that line was crossed, humans did not become animals. They became something far more dangerous. They became protectors, and protectors did not stop until the threat was eliminated. Monroe told it to tell his people this truth. Humans would always choose peace first, but if they ever threatened human children again, there would be no mercy. There would be no negotiation. There would only be war without end until one species or the other was gone. A was released the next morning. A shuttle took him to the edge of the system where a rescue ship was waiting. He looked back at New Meridian through the viewport and saw a small blue and green world that had changed the galaxy forever. Daniel Porter survived his wounds. He stayed on New Meridian and helped rebuild the settlement. He adopted 3 children who had lost their parents in the invasion. When people asked how he found the strength to fight, he always gave the same answer. He said he did not find strength. He said any human would have done the same. Protecting children was not heroic. It was simply human. The colony built a memorial in the central square. It stood where the fountain used to be. The statue showed a human woman with her arms spread wide, shielding children behind her. The base was carved with 112 names. His name was at the top. Every year on the anniversary of the invasion, humans across the galaxy observed a moment of silence for New Meridian. They remembered the farmers who fought with harvesting blades. They remembered the teachers who died protecting their students. They remembered what humans were capable of when the people they loved were threatened. A return to the Dominion, a changed being. He told his people what he had witnessed. He described the fury he had seen, but also the mercy. He explained that humans were not weak because they felt emotions. They were strong because of them. He wrote everything down in a document he called The Day I Fought Humans and Witnessed Unimaginable Fury. He submitted it to the military council as an official report. Then he retired from service and spent the rest of his life studying human culture. The report was classified at first. The leadership did not want their people to know how badly the invasion had failed, but copies spread through the military. Soldiers who had survived New Meridian confirmed everything I had written. Eventually, the report was and made required reading for all warriors. It became the most important document in their military education, not because it taught them how to fight humans, because it taught them why they should never try. The Dominion never attacked a human world again. They signed a peace treaty within 2 years of New Meridian. They opened trade routes and cultural exchanges. They became cautious allies of humanity in the centuries that followed. But they never forgot the lesson they learned in that small farming colony on the edge of space. They never forgot what humans became when their children were threatened. And somewhere on New Meridian, Daniel Porter watched his adopted children grow up in peace. He taught them to farm the land and respect all living things. He taught them to choose peace whenever possible. But he also taught them to protect what they loved, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. Because that was what it meant to be human.